Hey everybody, welcome to the sixth and final episode of Tabletop Showcase featuring Wildlands. If you've not caught up with the other episodes of Tabletop Showcase, myself and some of my friends have provided a week's worth of content talking about Wildlands. There'll be some links in the description below, definitely check those out. Today I'm going to be featuring the miniatures and more specifically how to paint those miniatures. So I've come up with a system that I think is going to be very accessible for new folks. So if you're not painted any miniature ever, hopefully this will be an easy way for you to get into it. If you really enjoy the game, this is another way that you can kind of bling out the game, spend some extra time with your game, and just make it look great on the table. So I'll have links and descriptions and things all in the description below the YouTube video about all of the different paints and shades and everything that you're going to need, or at least that I use in this video. The gist of it is I'll have one basic getting started kit from Vallejo Paints. It's a set of about 15 colors that we're going to do a little bit of mixing with, but all of the colors that come with it are going to be applicable to this miniature. They're game designed paints for game-based miniatures, and it's pretty cheap. You can find it at your local game store, at Amazon, or Miniature Market, or something like that for about 30 bucks. I'll have a link in description to all the paints that are in there below. And then on the other side, there's going to be a Citadel or Games Workshop set of shades. These are like inks that frankly make it look like you have a lot of talent. They make me look like I have a little bit of talent. That's also 30 bucks. So combine those two and you're most of the way there. I'll talk about a couple of other sort of components that you might want. These are going to be kind of optional for basing the miniatures and so on. So that's kind of the gist of it. What I'm going to do is walk you through one of the 4 warbands in the base box. And then we're going to walk through painting them, and you're going to physically see that happen. And then I'll give you a sort of a step-by-step quick overview of the rest of the warbands and show you all the different colors I use. It's not going to be overwhelming. So that way you can get a gist, because they're all completely different miniatures. So you can spend as much or as little time you want on each one of them and making them very individual. We're also going to cover here, you can see the expansion. And I've gone ahead and already painted these. That might be not a good look, but I will show you these in close-up detail. And speaking of these being painted, we will be giving away this copy of the base game and the expansion. There will be just details in the description below, and they will have mentioned it in the other videos as well, that the winner will get, again, this copy of the painted game of Wildlands. So let's jump down to the paint table. We'll get started. And then hopefully this doesn't feel intimidating or overwhelming to new folks, because I've very much geared this towards them to just use basic paints. Like I said, the starter set from Vallejo, the basic shade set from Citadel. Get in there, get going, lay down some base coats, layer some shade on there, do a couple of minor highlights, and then you should be really good to go. So let's get started. So before we get started, we're going to have to prime the miniature. Now on your left-hand side, you can see what the miniature looks like out of the box. It's going to come pre-washed actually, so the miniatures look great right out of the gate. And what I've decided to do is actually prime them white. That way it still keeps a little bit of that detail for you without doing too much of a complicated primer. There is a trick to priming with white. You can go ahead and prime them black and then just go from there. You could also do what's called a zenithal prime, where you prime it all black and then shoot it from white from above. But since we're going to try to gear this towards beginners, I went ahead and just primed them white. You can still see some of the shade a little bit underneath some of the miniatures there. So you can still pick out details where the clothes wrinkle and things like that. Now, if you're going to prime it white, my personal recommendation is to use this one from Citadel. It's called Corax White. It's a little bit more expensive. You can see here it's 17 bucks. You can get a Krylon White for about 4 or 5 bucks, but I find that to be kind of garbage actually, and may actually ruin your miniature. Now, if you've not primed a miniature before, definitely go on YouTube. I'll put a link to a video that is just all about priming. The only thing you really got to worry about is the temperature. So if you're going to spray on your primer, because it's a propellant, like so, you got to be careful about humidity and cold. So if it's, let's say, I would say I would not prime if it was more than 50% humidity. I think they say 60% is okay, but I just am a little bit gun shy. And if it's really cold out or raining, then I would not do a spray primer. You can go get an airbrush and prime with some primer paint out of that, but that's going to be really expensive if you've never done painting before. You can also go get a brush-on primer. Citadel makes some of those as well. You can just brush it on, and that's probably the safest way to do it. But this is going to definitely be the quickest. And as long as you are aware and cognizant about humidity and cold, you're going to be just fine. And don't just zap and cover the whole miniature with this primer. You're just going to do a very light sort of dusting of it, and just enough to kind of give it a nice coat. And this is what's going to make the actual paint stick to it. Now, the other thing to keep in mind about priming is at the very end, once you're done painting and basing everything, you're going to want to get what I call Tester's Dull Coat. Now, this is, you can see, sometimes it has different names in the store. You can see it says Dull Coat there. The way that you can tell, it has this sort of foggy cap there. And this as well, you want to be careful about humidity and temperature. You can also get brush-on varnishes and finishes as well, but this is easily the best. Again, just wait until it's at a decent temperature, it's not very humid, and just give this a light dusting. What this is going to do is it's going to protect the miniature. So here's an example of a finished miniature and then one that is straight out of the box. Once you're done doing everything to this miniature, then you're going to want to spray it with that varnish, that dull coat, and that's going to protect it. It's going to allow you to handle it without sort of slowly wearing the paint off. But there's one other little trick I wanted to just keep you aware of. Now in this game, each player has different player colors, and they're going to have a little snap on a color they're going to put on the base. So even though this one has already been varnished, I did some testing with it. With the varnish, if you snap on that colored base and then pull it off, it is going to go ahead and peel that paint off of the base here that I've colored black there. So you do still need to be very careful. Just be aware of that. It's not really that big a deal because obviously while you're playing, this is going to be covered anyway. But I found that actually once you paint the miniatures, they give enough of a life of their own, and they're going to look just like the cards that each of the players get in the game. So you almost don't really even need those bases because you're able to a lot easier, more quickly at least, identify which character goes with what, instead of having kind of a massive gray and black on the board there. So that's all the kind of stuff you want to know to begin and then end once we're done with the painting. But let's go ahead now and just jump right into painting. So here's all the paints and the shades that we're going to be using while we paint these. Again, this is the Vallejo basic kind of getting started set, and this is the Citadel shade set. This is all you're going to need here to get these going once you prime them. And then as a bonus, I'll show you how we're going to do the bases here. Let's see if I can get a good shot of that. So we're going to do this kind of basing style. This will just be kind of a little bonus at the end using some of these materials, and then this thing called Sterlin Mud here. Very, very simple, easy to do. So let's jump in. So first we're going to get started with Automaton, and I like to call him C-3PO with a crossbow. Now for most of these, I went ahead and kind of used the cards to sort of show, get the basic idea of the color scheme that I'm going to use. And this is a kind of a very simple, easy to kind of warm up with model here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get Gunmetal. And this is one of the colors obviously in the set. The important thing to keep in mind here are these numbers. Sometimes they actually call it a different name. If you get like an older set or something, they've changed actually the name of it. But again, all these are going to be in the YouTube description. Give the bottle a good shake. Put just a little bit on our palette. Get some on our brush here. We'll go ahead and we're just going to add a little bit of gunmetal to some of the central areas. So you want to be able to work from the center out, and this is a good example here. So this center sort of cog piece here, I'm just going to lay down a little bit of gunmetal in there. You can see that kind of darken up there. So we're going to get that in there, and then we're going to go ahead and do it on some of the different joints and pieces there. So we'll take a look here at this guy's elbow there, which you can see there. So you can start to see the elbow there. You've also got these little dots on the top, which I'll go ahead and paint. And you can see those right on the top. I went outside the line, so to speak. That's okay, because we're going to go back over it with some gold, and we're going to touch it up as we go. I'm going to go ahead and get his back here, all these different wires and things, cables. So there we got all the gunmetal color. You can see we got a little bit under his mouth there, some on his crossbow, and then in the back there. So we're kind of done with the gunmetal for right now on this particular character. Now one thing that I like to do is kind of stick with the same color for a minute. And so we're going to go over here to Elsie here, and this particular character is going to have, I'm just going to give them a kind of a gunmetal treatment on the little spider legs that they've got there. So we'll get some more color on our brush here. And we'll get to work just laying down a very even, nice thin coat of gunmetal here. Just don't be afraid to kind of slaughter it over, but don't go too thick with the actual color there, because you don't want to cake it on there. You want to go ahead and do it thin. If you got to do 2 thin coats, of course, that's always the mantra, and go ahead and do that. So here you can see I've covered all the areas I want to with the gunmetal. It's got the legs there covered, and also the little kind of like handlebars or levers that he uses to move him. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a he, it could be a she. The name of this character is Elsie, so that's a little bit ambiguous. So the gunmetal is finished for this particular character, and I don't see anything right now that I want to add any gunmetal to, so I'm going to move on. So now I'm going to move on to tack, and we're going to go ahead and paint the inner shirt and then the outer shirt, and then move on to the rest. So if you take a look at the card here, which gives you an idea of the art, you can see there's kind of a blue undershirt with kind of a gray overall there. So we're going to start with that inner blue. Mix that down to a nice thin consistency, not too thin, don't want it to run. And we don't need very much of it in here because it's just a tight little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and work it from the back, because it's a little bit more prevalent on the back, and then it'll allow me to more easily pick out the details that are on the front that are a little bit more kind of bunched in and covered up by the overalls there. And you can see a little bit of that blue got under the face a little bit. You might not be able to see it on camera, but I can certainly see it here. And here we've got the back there all colored in. So that's kind of the most inner part of this particular miniature, and now I'm going to work my way out. Now we've got a similar situation with this Goblin fella here. He's got some green skin it's kind of right under his chin, right above his shirt. So we're just going to go ahead and do all of the quote-unquote flesh tone for this particular Goblin. And we're going to use the color of Goblin Green. This is aptly named. So we're just going to start to work this all over the skin there. Just get it everywhere. Not too thick. Not too thin either. You don't want it to run everywhere. Now you can see we got the Goblin Green all applied there in the various little parts of the skin. So we've got color on all but one of the miniatures that we're going to be painting here. We're going to take a look at this fella here, and you can see we're going to go ahead and paint the inner part of his coat there. So he's got kind of an outer coat, which you can see him wearing. That's going to be like a leather brown. We're going to do a little bit darker of a burnt brown on the inside there in his shirt. So we're going to take Beasty Brown. In this here, we're just going to stick all up inside here and get that all layered in there. We'll have to go back in and fix up his belt. And we're going to stay off of his shoes as well, because I'd like to make those a little bit more leathery to lighter brown. Okay, so that was pretty quick. And since we're on that leathery brown, I just put some out. I'm going to go ahead and color up his crossbow and give it a little bit of a wooden color. Not leather brown, I should say the beastly brown. So we're going to go ahead and mark this up a little bit, like so. So here you can see we've got the crossbow done. I'm going to stick with this miniature here. I'm going to go and just cover the rest of this fella here in gold. This is probably the simplest miniature in the whole box. So just a couple of colors, and we'll get into some shading here in a second. But let's go ahead and cover him up with some polished gold. Get some gold on our brush. And then we're just going to go ahead and not be afraid and just cover this whole sucker up. Nice thin layer of gold everywhere that we haven't painted. Okay, so Mr. Automaton here is completed with all of the different base coats, and you can see there he's got mostly gold all around with some metallics for kind of the wiring in between, and then his little crossbow there. So he's done being base coated. We're going to keep going with the base coating, get everybody base coated, and we're going to come back and shade. Now he's also going to be, in addition to being the easiest to kind of paint, he's going to be the easiest to shade, and then after the shade dries, then we'll highlight and be very close to being done. Now we're going to get a little bit of Stonewall Grey. We're going to go back to Elsie here and do their overalls. And we're going to go ahead and start to layer in just a straight Stonewall Grey right on here. We'll add some more color and depth here when we get into the shading, but this is just going to be a nice base coat. So probably a little bit tricky to see the difference because that white primer does come off slightly off-white, a little bit gray, but she's definitely a little bit more gray than she was. Now we're going to get to Elsie. I think I called Tack Elsie. I get them confused. They look very much alike, like they could be brother and sister or possibly twins or something like that. So we're going to do a slightly different color on this folks shirt here. It's going to have a little bit of the blue that I used on a Tack shirt, a little bit of the gray we just used mixed together, and then a little bit of black just to kind of darken it up. So we're going to mix a little bit of colors over here on the palette, get that going. And then we're going to lay down a little bit of color here. Now on the art it shows him with a plaid kind of checkered shirt. We're not going to get that crazy with the detail, and we're just going to kind of get in here and get a good solid color. So there's his color there. You can see it very much kind of bleeds in and sort of muddies up and gets blended with the gunmetal there. We are going to go ahead and fix that as we get to the shading and the highlights. But I want to try to keep as close as to the game art as I could. So we've got now his overall shirt colored up there. Now while Elsie is drying, we're going to go ahead and start to apply some flesh tones, starting with this fella here and then working back to a couple of the other miniatures that have human flesh. So the color that comes with this is actually pretty nice. It's this Bronze Fleshtone. You can see the number there, which will show up in the description. And this is sort of a mid-range flesh tone that you can take lighter and darker pretty easily. So this one we're actually going to take it a little bit lighter. I'll show some other war bands that I did previously that have very dark to kind of not so dark skin tone. So we'll go ahead and put a little bit on our palette there, and then we're just going to mix in a little bit of white with that to kind of brighten it up a little bit. I'm going to go in here and just going to be a little bit more careful than we've been before on the skin. It's okay to apply, definitely in this case, 2 thin coats, because the lighter colors are going to have a little bit of time kind of taking hold. Sometimes, depends on the pigment. So we can see we got a little bit of a lighter tone on his skin there, and even on the hands there on the back. So let's go ahead and work back into some of the other models that have been drying and work this same skin tone in there. So we'll go here with Tack and start adding the skin tone. Then we got some skin tone here, get on the back of the arms and such. Then we'll go ahead and add that same skin tone here to Elsie. And I should say, you can see I'm actually holding it sideways. Having some kind of device like this, or just get some like sticky tack and put it on top of like an Advil bottle or a vitamin bottle or whatever, and then allows you to kind of turn it around and get at weird angles and stuff like that without having to worry about touching the miniature and so on. This is a Citadel thing. I think they're like $8. I got a couple of these. They're pretty handy. You can squeeze things in and out of there like that. Definitely not required, but something like this is pretty cool to have. Okay, skin color is done there. Speaking of skin, earlier I had not done the skin on this goblin's legs there. I had just kind of missed it. I wasn't sure if those were pants or something. And that's something you'll find that happens as you kind of paint, you know, a set of models like this that you kind of bounce around and find little things you didn't notice before and just kind of give yourself kind of new little kind of problems to solve. So anyway, we went back and touched up his legs. And sticking with the goblin here, let's go ahead and jump into some leather brown. It's a little bit lighter of a brown than we've been working with up until now. There's a lot of little kind of details and like little satchels and bags and straps and things. And then the old man's coat, for example, that I would like to be leather based on the card art. So let's go ahead and just jump into the leather brown. We can do that on several of the miniatures. And we're just going to lay it right down. Now you can see he has these little sticks of dynamite there. We're going to try to not touch those. We're going to paint those red here in a little bit. But I'm going to get the leather laid down first and then come back into the red. I could do it the other way, but it's just a matter of going through and touching up mistakes back and forth kind of thing. A lot of times with painting, it's like, oh, I painted over the red, and I got to paint the red, and I painted over where the brown is. I got to add a little bit of brown. Just kind of slowly getting it closer and closer and closer to what you want. So let's go ahead and start adding the leather here. Okay, so we got a nice kind of almost pukey leather there on this Goblin, which it's going to look a lot different once we start shading it. But we've got a nice base color there. And we're going to go ahead and do Tack's shoes leather. Just get those in there. Don't worry about getting any color on these bases at all, because we're going to cover them up with a bunch of rocks and dirt and all kinds of good stuff. So no big deal. And even if you weren't, you could go ahead and just, you know, paint the base black if you wanted. So it doesn't really matter what color you get on the base. There we go. She's got some shoes. And we'll go ahead and do the old man's shoes and his coat as well. Okay, you can see he's kind of starting to brown up there. Now he does have these little elbow pads that you can see. I'm just going to go ahead and paint those red later. And he's got one there on the back. There, right there. So we left those alone. We'll go and paint those red later on. But now his leather bits are done. We're going to go back to LC. You can see that they have this little satchel and this strap kind of going around them there, which I've covered up with a little bit of that dark gray. Now I've got a smaller brush there with a little bit, it's probably hard to focus on a little tip like that, but it's very small. This is, I believe, a 000 brush, which you don't really need. I just have a whole bunch of brushes, so doing a real small detail like this, I'll just get a little bit of paint right on the tip there, and just paint that very slowly on there. So let's get that little shot here. And you definitely don't want to get this too thin when you do that, because it's going to run a little bit. So we'll try to keep it nice and consistent paint. And it's probably hard to get this on the camera, but we'll go ahead and just kind of touch this up and come back and show you. Okay, there you can see that leather strap going around, get a better idea of it there. So there you go. And so when you notice here, I've got some paper towel here as well. When you get a little bit of paint and water on your brush, don't be afraid. You can see this kind of slowly build up here to wick off a little bit of that excess. So you have it right on the tip there. And that will give you the more control. So I think we're done with the leather. And I think I'm kind of bored of these muddy colors right now, so I'm going to use this red here. This is a nice bright red. It's called, what's it called? Bloody red. So this is a good solid sort of primary red. We're going to go ahead and do the dynamite as well as the scarf on Tack. So once again, we got our little brush there. We're going to go ahead and get in real close there, and we're just going to go ahead and try to touch up those little dynamite bits right there. So you can see we got the little red poking out there from the dynamite. And then we're going to go ahead and cover up this, I'll just color that whole scarf there in that nice bright red. There we go. So we got the scarf there, or I should say the bandana type of thing there. So you can see as you start to add more kind of varying colors, you know, some darker, duller, some brighter that pop more, it adds a lot of three-dimensionality to your model, at least it starts to. Now, I keep forgetting stuff on this Goblin. I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom of his shoes and make those also a leather. We're going to leave the fur alone for now, but let's go ahead and do that. So you can see now we've got the bottom of his boots done. Now let's go and paint this giant wrench here. We're going to do a solid silver. So this is a kind of a little bit lighter tone than the gunmetal. We're going to go ahead and go straight right into silver on this, and then a couple other bits. I got some silver loaded up onto our brush there. Just give us a good coating, being careful not to go onto the skin or any of the leather bits that we painted earlier. So you can see I made that wrench a silver, and I also went ahead and did these little elbow pads a solid red. That way. There, you can see there on that backside. So he's getting pretty close to base coated. We just have to get into his hair, or his beard. He doesn't have hair. We'll get to his beard. But first we'll go back to this Goblin here. I'm going to paint these little goggles. I don't know if you can see on the top of his head there, a silver, and then of course the head of his mallet will be a silver. Actually, I think I'm going to do the whole mallet, that metallic silver, just to kind of break things up a little bit. Okay, you can see the silver mallet there and a little bit of the silver goggles. And all we've got to do left for him is his hair. Moving back to Tack, one thing we should have done probably, but it's okay that we didn't do it because I wasn't really sure, it was the gun. So I'm going to do this sort of the barrel that's sort of resting inside of this wooden piece here. We're going to do that as silver, and then I'll go back around and then kind of make the rest of this, the grip and the stock and everything, a more wood color, We're going to do the Beastly Brown on that. So some silver on the barrel and then Beastly Brown on the rest. So here you can see a little bit of the wood color there, and then the barrel, and also on the trigger mechanism, I went and just touched that up with a little bit of that silver as well. Now, all that's left to do is hair on each of these different models. So I've been kind of debating what color to do the hair. One thing I know for sure is the old man's hair is a bright, bright orange. So I'm going to go ahead and do his color because I like that color. Mix this up here. You can see this is an orange fire. It's just a really, really bright, bright orange color. We're going to just lock that in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do this. And this we're going to be careful with. We don't want to get this all over the skin and all over the coat. Just kind of make very slowly, just kind of touch it in there. You don't have to always, you know, move your brush back and forth. Sometimes you can just touch, let the color kind of go where it wants, and just kind of poke around. Let the little bristles go where they're going to go. Just take your time. There we go. We've gone very gingerfied with that nice bright orange. So now what I think I'm going to do here with the Goblin here is we're going to make his hair color a darker red. So we're going to use that red that we used before, that bloody red on the dynamite, just mix in a little bit of black, darken that up so to be a little bit more of a scarlet, not burgundy, but you know, a little bit deeper, darker red. So again, we mix a little bit of black with it, but we don't want to turn it completely brown. We still want to maintain its redness there. So you can see this is a much, a little bit deeper of a red there. So go ahead and coat his hair like that. Okay, so you can see we've got a nice dark red for his hair. So now he's done, because I'm actually going to leave this fur. I'll show you a little bit of a technique that you could do. So this, I kind of like this furry color. It obviously needs some shading and stuff, but to kind of, you know, have that that fur texture, we're going to leave it that kind of off-white. Now the final bit of base coating is going to be the hair here on the twins. This is just going to be a very simple, small little application of black. So we're going to start with tack here. Again, just get our little small brush and then get right in there with the details, being extra careful. So you can see we got her hair all nice and blackened in there. And now we're going to move on to the other twin. And then we've got his hair all blackened up there. So now we've got the base coating done. We can start to move on to shading, which is a very, very simple technique. And these are when we're going to start using our Citadel Shades. So the first one we're going to look at is this Reikland Fleshshade. They might say, we're going to apply this to the flesh. Well, yes, but we're also going to apply it to our little robot here, because gold shade work very, very well together. So we're going to go ahead and shake this up. I'm going to stick it over to the side. I like to keep this here in a little tray, because if I knock it over and it spills inside this tray, as you can see, it's done a few times, and not all over the table and all over all their things that are important to me. So we're going to set this over to the side here, give it a good little shake. And then we're going to go ahead and just lather this on, get a good chunk of it on our brush, and just kind of put it everywhere. Just kind of get it all over the place. And this guy's real easy, because it doesn't matter if this gets into where the metal is and stuff. That's okay. Now as you get it on, you're going to kind of see where it might pool up a little bit. So as I get this going, and you want it to pull up in the little ridges and recesses and little bumps and nooks and crannies and stuff like that. As you can see there. So it really starts to turn that gold into sort of a plain kind of gross color. Like you can see there. We'll go ahead and just wick some off there and start to layer some of this on. And it gives it a nice hue there. It gives it some nice little shading and stuff. You don't just want to leave it on the flat surface like that. You can kind of just brush it away. It's very liquidy. But like on this little arch there, we're going to kind of leave it around that. It'll add a little bit of a shadow right there for you. So just kind of layer it on and then just wipe it off on the flat areas where you don't really need it. So we'll go ahead and do the rest of this guy here. So there you can see it's a little bit wet. This does take some extra time to dry beyond the normal paint, but you can see it really start to get into the cracks and the recesses of the wiring and his little sort of metallic body there in the knees and the joints and everything. Now, I didn't apply any of this to the crossbow. Now for the crossbow, I'm going to use a different color. Let's just go with the Agrax Earthshade here. This is kind of a dirty brown color. And we'll go ahead and just kind of apply that somewhat generously, trying not to get it on the gold, and just get that on there like so. Like that, and we can go ahead and just let them dry. Now, some of y'all can go ahead and stop right now. As I go through and do the shading on these different things, you can just lay down some base coats, lay in some shading, paint the base black, you're done. It's a fine way to start painting. I'm going to go beyond that. I'm going to show you some highlighting, a little bit of dry brushing, and then basing, of course, like that. But this is not a bad start compared to, you know, what he started off as. So that's certainly something you can do. Lay down some base coats, you know, coat it with maybe a shade or two that is sort of the right color. Or you can just stick with the Nuln Oil. Here I have some of that there. This is just a straight kind of black shade. And that's just going to, you know, get into the recesses, the deep dark corners of the miniature, and bring out the rest of the miniature by, you know, sort of quote unquote highlighting those black, you know, getting into those corners and doing the shadows. So that's a good start anyway. So now we're going to go back to the old man. We're going to use again the Reikland Fleshshade on this little tip, and we're going to go and do just a little bit more careful of a wash here. Just get him into these recesses like so. Get a little bit on his head. Just kind of push this around a little bit. Kind of let it stay thin. So you can see there I got some, you know, a little slightly bit heavier in the eye sockets there, and then also on the back of the hand, you can see that has a nice line there that kind of break up between the jacket and the hand. So even if you get a little further away, you can still notice that detail, so to speak, there. So that's a little bit of flesh shade applied to him. So we're going to go ahead and do the other folks here with the flesh. It's going to be the same idea with Dak here. And now she's starting to have a little bit of definition there on the skin as well. So we'll let that dry. And we'll go ahead and do Elsie. And right away you start to see a little bit of the definition there. What about our goblin friend here? We've got green skin. Well, thankfully, we get this Biel tan green shade. So we're going to go ahead and apply this on to his skin. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Same principle, just being careful and applying it in all the little green nooks and crannies there. And so we got some nice definition on his muscles and his face, on his fingertips and his hands there. So moving back to the old man, we're going to go ahead and do his clothes in Seraphim Sepia, which is a sort of like an Agrax Earthshade. It's a different sort of softer brown than the Earthshade. So we'll go ahead and just start to apply that pretty generously on his cloak here. And also we're going to put this on his boots and also in the undershirt as well. But we're going to keep it away from his face and from the wrench and those pads. Okay, starting to get some definition there. You can see, that's, again, it's still a little wet there, but you can see these little spots on the cloth really picking up those recesses, like so. We're going to do a little bit something different here for attack. We're going to go ahead and use that Nuln Oil, which I showed you just a minute ago, that darker, blacker shade. This one's going to be a little bit different. It's going to darken up pretty quick, so we're going to throw it on her overalls there, as well as her shirt. But then we're going to do a lot of kind of wiping away. You can see it right away start to pick up those little creases in her pants, but we don't want it really like coffee staining the rest of the clothes. So we're going to lay it on, and then we're going to sort of just pick it off as it sort of stains the flat parts. So that's this thing you got to be careful of, and just kind of dab your brush, wick off some water over here, get it off on the paper towel so it doesn't run everywhere, and just kind of pick it off as it starts to pool up and sort of stain the rest of the clothes, because you just want to get it into the recesses. So we're going to do that everywhere on here except for the skin, which we've already done. There we go. You can see just a little bit of definition on the wrinkles and even in the shirt and so on And we're going to do a similar application here of the Nuln Oil to this fella here. We're going to be extra generous with it on the actual metallic parts because everything's going to kind of darken up as we do this, but we're going to come back in and then sort of bring it out with a highlight, or in the case of this metal, a sort of a silver dry brush to kind of happen. You can start to see some of the different metallic details start to come out there. So here we've got the Goblin, and we're going to do a couple different things with him. First off, we're going to do Nuln Oil in a few places. We're going to do it here on the fur. We're going to do it on the metal pieces, the goggles and the hammer. And then we're going to go back in and do the Seraphim Sepia a little bit later on the vest and the shoes. So go ahead and get our Nuln Oil, and we're going to get it going into the fur here. But again, we're going to kind of wipe it away. We don't want to darken it up too much because this we want to keep pretty light, and we don't really want to stain it. And there you can see a little bit of the fur starting to take hold. I do actually leave a little bit of a stain on a lot of times when I do like weapons or some metallic things like swords and things, just to kind of show sort of a little bit of a hint of rust and wear and tear. Now moving back to the old man, and as you can see I'm kind of moving around because the shades do take a little bit of time to dry, so he's been sitting there for a few minutes. So I'm going to go back and do a similar thing with the Nuln Oil right on there. See, that kind of just dulls it enough to make it look like a little bit of a worn metal. So we're going to go ahead and apply that. So we've got him there. And I've gone ahead and left his beard alone for right now. I'm not going to do any shading on his beard just yet. So we're going to go back in here, and we're going to do Seraphim Sepia again on the vest and on the boots, being careful not to let it run into the places that we already have maybe some still wet Nuln Oil. So there we went and added a little bit of shade there to those, and you can see it really starts to pick out the folds and the clothes as well. Now we're going to get in and going to do a Carroburg Crimson on his red hair. And this is it's almost like a violet, but it's definitely more red of a shade. Go ahead and just start to apply this on there, and this will darken it up and get into the ridges, but it won't take away any of the red. So there you can see we just got a little bit of darkness in the back of the red there. Now I'm going ahead and doing the same thing here with with the Carroburg Crimson, just a little bit on the old man's orange beard, just a tiny bit, not a lot, just to kind of get slightly in the nooks and crannies. It's probably hard to see on the camera with the lighting there, but you can sort of see right in there. That looks good there. And then I'm also just going to tint up a little bit there on the those little elbow pads there, just to get a little bit of 3D to them. So while I let the various shades dry, I went ahead and painted the bases black just to kind of give you an example of what I was talking about earlier. If you wanted to stop at this point, you could. I think it would be perfectly fine if you're a new painter and you didn't want to get too crazy with it or spend an excessive quote unquote amount of time. You could do that. So here is the Automaton character there with a little crossbow. We've got some shade, you got some base coats, painted the base black. Here is a Shiv again, the Goblin character. Again, just base coats and shades. And here you've got Elsie. Now here's one that you definitely probably want to pick out some highlights. Now, if you wanted to do kind of the real basic, simple approach, I would just probably suggest getting a different color shirt because it does all kind of blend together, his shirt and the silver, the gunmetal on his little legs there. But we're going to take some steps to kind of rectify that and give it a little bit more contrast. And here is, I'm not trying to pronounce his name, it's either Gunol or Gunold. I'm just going to call him the old man with the wrench. And so again, you can just see a little bit of shading, a little bit of detail coming out there with just the base coats and your Citadel Shades. And then finally here we've got Tack with the overalls and then the cool looking scarf there at the top and her blunderbuss or shotgun or whatever that's supposed to be. So there you go. That's just the base coats and the shades, and that's it. So now we're going to go in and do some highlighting. Usually that's kind of a two-step process for me. I'll paint on a layer in some other areas, and as well as possibly some dry brushing. But one thing here, I've got the polished gold, just the basic color. And I'm going to go back into some of these highlighted areas and then kind of touch up like the top of his head, because you do sometimes get a little bit of staining there. And then also going to paint here these ridges here on the edges of the shoulder pads, just to kind of give it a little bit of a brightness and to get a kind of a contrast from the stuff that we've just shaded now. So you want to be careful to keep it out of the recesses that you just filled in color with. And then you'll get a little bit more of a pop there on that. So we'll do like the arms here as well, just that top plate there, just to kind of lighten it up. So you can see on these two arm plates, it's just going to pop just a little bit more and just add a little bit more contrast to the stuff that we just shaded. So we'll do a little bit more like there on that shoulder pad there. And then also here we're going to see on the thighs, just kind of slowly put that in there. That's just going to brighten that up a little bit. Do a little bit here on the fingers. Just get in there and touch it up. Don't worry too much about being too exact. We're not trying to, see it starts to pop out a little bit more there. A little bit of contrast. Because remember, you are just going to be kind of looking at this stuff from about 3 feet away on the table, ideally. And we're not trying to win a Golden Demon or a Crystal Brush Award with these. And I'll do a little bit here on the back as well. Right there. So you can see we get a little bit more contrast there. A little bit more pops and highlights. Now we're going to do something similar with the silver, because remember we painted these gunmetal and stuff inside. So we're going to just get really close in and just sort of, it's almost like a dry brush kind of thing, but just pick out little tiny nooks and crannies of details with the silver. And this is going to be tricky to get on camera exactly right there. So we're just going to kind of just dab in a little bit there. Just those little like dots and cogs and things. Just trying to get that in there like that. So you can see I picked out some of the details there. I don't know if you can see his eyes. I put a little bit of dot of silver on those little eye sockets there. And if we look back here, you can also see just picked out little bitty spots with the silver like so. So now we're just going to do the same idea here on the wooden bits of the crossbow, which you can also see, I should have mentioned, add a little bit there, a little bit on the tip there, on kind of the sight of the crossbow. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab that Beasty Brown, and I'm going to lighten that up with a little bit of white just to make it a little bit lighter and just get the edges there of that crossbow. So we mix a little bit of white in that Beasty Brown. Just going to kind of catch the edges here of that crossbow and the tips. So you can see just kind of lighten that up a little bit there, just to give it a little bit of a highlight. Anywhere that you think it might be catching light, that the sunlight would come down and hit it, you can go ahead and just kind of lighten up any kind of flat surfaces there. So you can see this is a little bit more of a well-rounded looking model just by adding those couple of little highlights. So it's not a whole lot of effort there, just being real choosy and picking out, raised edges and so on the different bits. And we can do something similar here with the Goblin. We're going to mix the Goblin green with a little bit of white, and we're going to just kind of lighten up that green and just pick out some of the details. We're just got a little bit on his nose there, just a tiny bit, not a ton. A little bit here on his raised arm, kind of on his forearm there. Lighten that up a little bit. We'll get the other back here of this, sort of the back side of his forearm. A little bit on his elbow there. A little bit on his back side, shoulders, and so on. And then while that dries, we're going to do a little bit on his hair. We're just going to use the straight bloody red, because remember we didn't actually mix this down with a little bit of black. So we're going to just get the top edges here of the hair. So if you just look at that right there, like that, and just get the top ridges. And then similar here with the cloth here on the leather, we're going to mix that leather brown with some white and then grab just those top edges like so. Just right on the ridges on the top. And you can see that started to dry. You can see some of the different shades of green, especially on this arm. You can see it's very light, it's very dark up in toward the elbow, and a little bit kind of a medium tone there. And then you can sort of see there, like on these pockets, it's just a little bit lighter of a brown there as well. And then on the back, you can see this as well, like so. And here we're going to do the same idea here with the coat and boots and everything of the old man. We're going to take that lighter leather brown, and you can start to see a little bit more interesting kind of folds in the leather there. A little bit more interesting. So now we're going to do a lightened of the flesh tone, so even a little bit lighter than we initially applied, and then we're just kind of pick out some of the little top parts, the nose and the top of the head and so on. So we've kind of lightened that up. We've picked out some details on the hands and so on, just to give it a little bit more definition in 3 dimensions. And it also makes the eye sockets a little bit more contrast because you've still got your some of your shade inside of there. And we're going to do something similar here with a direct silver on top of this wrench, just on the main flat parts, just to add in a little kind of, it's almost like a little bit of weathering kind of thing, because you got the shade and the light parts there. So there we go. So you got some good kind of contrast there working with the darkness and the. Now moving over to tack, we're just going to do a little bit of the gun barrel with the lightened Beasty Brown. So you can see the gun has got a little bit better highlighting and definition there around the corners and things. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to dry brush this gunmetal. And I've got a special dry brush. You can see it's got some flatter bristles, and it's a little, it's not like a normal brush. So you want to go find a dry brush. And you take, in this case, the silver, and you're going to wipe off most of it. Like keep wiping. Don't get the brush wet, just keep it dry. Now in this case, we're going to go ahead and dry brush into this guy here. So just being careful not to touch the clothes and things. So you can see there, you're starting to pick out that metal a little bit more just by doing that very quickly. Just do that and just, try to catch all the little edges and ridges and things like that. Now we're going to do a similar thing, but in this time we're going to dry brush white, and I'm just going to do it all over the rest of the miniature, just being very careful. Make sure you wick off enough of the paint, and you can even test it. One thing I like to do is put it on the bottom of the paint. You just see so it's like barely coming off, just barely coming off. So I'll get on here and I'll just start wicking this a bit. Get on his hair, his clothes. In this case, I'm just doing a straight white, just to kind of pick out some of these other little ridges, because this is a very muted color palette for this particular character. Just kind of do it, and you're just kind of picking at edges here. Get the hair, get the strap on him there. Even get back down into the metallic parts, just a little bit on the metallic. Don't do a whole ton there on the metallics. You don't want to go over that silver too much. So there, he's starting to look okay. You can see how we caught some of the ridges on the clothes and things like that, and on his hair. And we're going to do the same technique here with tack. Get some white paint on there, wick it off a lot. Just wick it off a bunch. And we're going to go in there and just get at her hair a bit. We'll lighten that up. Get at the little buttons and things on her overalls, a little bit on the gun, a little bit on the ridges of her shirt and things. Just a tiny bit, don't go crazy. Just catch edges. Now the last step is to put little black dots in their eyes, which I'm not going to try to do on camera because I'll just screw it up, which I've already screwed up. This is an example of one. You don't have to do this. You can do different style of eyes. You could do black dots with a white dot or different colors, which I'll show you. So I did some different colors on the other warbands, but for this particular group, I just said I'll just do little black dots to be simple. And again, I try to use a little sharp thing. and then go in and just a little dot, and then put it in the right spot. If you screw it up, you can get some water in there and sort of erase it out of there. But it's very tricky to get it in the right angle because I got to hold it sort of close and get real steady, take a breath, all of that kind of stuff. So now we're going to start doing the basing, which is totally optional, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it. Now, there's a couple of things you're going to want to see. You want to get at this Sterlin Mud here. This is another Citadel product. Give it a little bit of a shake, doesn't really matter too much. And you can see it's mud. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this. Now you can get like a little spatula looking thing here, like so, or you can use the back of your paintbrush or a toothpick or whatever you want. So I'm going to get this and get a glob of it. We'll go ahead and just get a glob of it right here, like so. Just a little dab of it there, and a little bit more than that. And then we're going to take it. Now I'm going to take it off of this for right now, just to show you. And then I'm actually going to do this down here on my mat here. But you just get this on here like so. You can see that sort of there. And you just kind of push it around. You want different heights and things. So just push it around. Don't worry if you get a little bit on, don't cake it on there a lot, I would say. But if you get some kind of touching his feet, that's not a big deal. So let me go ahead and cake this on here. So you can see there, I've got a good amount on there. Now some will get on the ridge, you can see my finger there. Don't be afraid to just wipe that off with your hand and throw it in a paper towel. Now while this is sitting here like this, you're going to want to, this is all optional of course, you can do different steps, but while this is sitting here like this, I'm going to get some glue, and I've got here just my super glue from the hobby store. I'm going to get some rocks, and you have these this Warhammer Basing Kit. It has all kinds of different kinds of rocks and things. Now there's one thing that we're interested in this case. There's a lot of extra stuff you don't need this. There's going to be this little bag of little tiny rocks. So while this is still drying, we're going to go ahead and glue just a couple little spots, maybe two. I wouldn't go more than two, even one. Just do one or two little spots. And then you're going to push the rock in on top of the glue. So let's get this going. So we'll get some little rocks here. I'm just going to sprinkle a few out on my mat. Find some ones that look like they're fun. And these are tiny, so these are small miniatures that you're working with here, so you want to have not too big of rocks. So I'm just going to take a look at my my guy there. You can see him in the middle, and then I'm going to find a couple of spots I think where I want to have a rock. So we're going to plop one bit of glue right there. Let's do this a little bit closer. We'll get one bit of glue, so we'll drop a glue right there, and then we'll do one here back behind his foot there. A bit too much, but that's okay. We're just going to then take a rock and then plop it right on that spot. So I'm just going to stick that right there. Just nudge it a little bit. I'll get my little spatula thingy here. Just tap it down, get it into the glue, like so. See that rock sitting there? So I'll get another littler rock. I'm going to put it in the back here. And we're going to go ahead and just tap that down just to get it into the glue. Now these are going to sit here for a bit. It's going to take, I don't know, but I'd give it an hour or so, maybe 2 hours for the glue to dry. The glue's going to dry quick, and then this Sterlin Mud is going to dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go ahead and finish out the rest of these, get the mud on there and get the rocks glued down. And then what we're going to do is apply a Nuln Oil just a little bit on the rocks, just to kind of darken them up, and then basically go dry brush them in a few different ways. And then if you want, we can then stick some grass on there. But let's take a break, and then I'm going to get the mud and the rocks on the rest. So some time has passed. I've got the rocks here on all of the different miniatures. You can see there. This guy there, got the rocks and a little bit of that mud on there. I did go back through and touch up the black rims around the base there. Now I'm just going to get a little bit of Nuln Oil, like so. This is not rocket science. And then I'm going to then just dab it onto just the rocks, and then a little bit around the rocks onto the mud. And I'm going to do that on each of the models there. We're going to let that dry for a little bit, and then we're going to go back in here, and then we're going to dry brush the bases. Okay, everything's pretty well dried up by now. So we're basically going to layer on 3 layers of dry brush. First we're going to dry brush the leather brown, then we're going to do the Stonewall Grey, and then we're going to do a little bit of white, kind of catching a little bit of the rock, specifically with the white. So first let's apply the leather brown. Get some wiped off there. And then we're just going to get after it in here. Just going to get after it. Get a good basing of it. I'm going to go ahead and just do the rest of them here and get them all layered with the leather brown, and then I'll show you the Stonewall after. You can see it's kind of lightened that up just a little bit. Now we're going to apply a little bit of the Stonewall. Again, we're just going to get after it. Get this covering over. So just going to get some layers of different types of soil and things like that, just an indication of that. So we're going to go ahead and do that on the rest of these as well. There we got a little bit of that gray in there, and now we're just going to go through and catch just a little bit of, you can see my hands are getting messy there. You can catch a little bit of these stones with just a little bit of white dry brush, very, very lightly though, not too crazy. Just going to catch these edges very, very lightly, like so. And now we've got that gone. You can see a little bit of the white there. Now we're going to apply for the final step. And again, all this kind of stuff is really just optional stuff. You could paint your bases black. I have this Mordheim turf. Okay, and now you're going to get this. It's another Citadel product. And I should have said, obviously, with these rocks, you could go out to your yard and find very tiny rocks as well. But if you don't have access to those types of rocks or anything really handy, then you can go and get that basing material, and it will, supplement any other miniatures you might do. Now this one here has these different kinds of Mordheim turfs. They come in different sizes. You can get very large on this side, and the other one here, which I've already dug into for some of the other minis, you've got much smaller ones, and this is the ones that you're going to be after here to do this. So we're going to plop a little bits of glue on, and you're going to want to do it, at least this was my choice, put them into like where the rock meets the base. So that they'll see like little tufts of grass kind of coming out of the rock. So let me do one here real quick. Now these tufts here, you can see it right in there. They do have a little bit of a sticky on the bottom there, and they will stick a little bit, but you want to put a little dab of glue as well right where you want to do it, because that'll really hold it. So we'll just do a little bit of glue here right at its foot. Little tiny bit of glue. Stick that there, and we'll go ahead, and sometimes this sort of real particular work is hard to do on the camera, so I'm just going to plop him on there like so, like that, and I'll get my little stick and I'll just kind of wedge it into there like so. Okay, so I'm going to do that on the rest of these, and then we'll come back, take a look at them sort of finished. I'll go ahead and spray these. So this will be probably the next day, but I'll spray these down with, again, the Tester's Dull Coat. Okay, that'll lock in the paint and seal it a little bit. And then we'll take a look at these and also go through the other miniatures that are in the game. And I'll tell you about the colors and the steps, sort of a brief overview of the rest of them. Okay, so you can see here the finished Warband that we went through and painted. And this is after it's been based and varnished and all that kind of good stuff. So let me go ahead and then kind of walk you quickly through the rest of the models that come in the game. And I'll give you a quick breakdown of all the colors and shades and the little bits of highlights and things that I used on the rest of the models. So here we can see the Lawbringers, and this is the Warband for them. And so I'll just kind of quickly walk through each of these. So obviously you can say I did a straight silver on this fella's armor and his sword. And then for his face, I just did that Bronze Fleshtone just straight out. And then of course covered the silver bits with a Nuln Oil, and then a flesh shade on his face and his legs. And I kept that flesh color going up into his horns as well. And then you can also see I did a little bit of a kind of a darker red on his belt there, so I blackened up the red again. And then here I did the leather brown on his little pouches and his big satchel there. And then I did a beastly brown on the handle of his sword, like so. And then on these I did a Seraphim Sepia on those particular things. And then I went in and did the kind of the typical highlighting, a couple of lighter strokes of the brown, and then the silver back on top after the shading, and so on there. And then over here we did a mix here on the skin for the Minotaur character here of the blue, again mixed with the gray, and then a little bit of black in there, not a lot. And then we used a Bonewhite on the horns. And then in the, it's maybe a little bit hard to see here, you can see a leather brown on her skirt, and then we went and did the gold on her chest piece, which you can see more of in the back there, and you can see the leather brown there. And then down here we did the beastly brown on the hooves there. And then we did the Agrax Earthshade on the horns, and we did a Drakenhof Nightshade, which is a blue shade on her skin. And then of course the silver on the handle of her mallet, and then the beastly brown on the handle. And so again, Nuln Oil there, and then Agrax Earthshade on that. And then of course again the Reikland Fleshshade on the gold bits, Seraphim Sepia on the leather bits, and so on there. And then did a little bit of highlighting there. You can see a little bit of those, like on her nose, we kind of lightened that up a little bit we did a sort of a lighter version of that same bluish gray there on her skin, and so on. And then here this gal, we again did the flesh shade a little bit darkened up with some black. And then here with the brown, sort of almost like a blonde hair, we did the leather brown there, and then lightened it up as we moved on. And then again, the same color blue basically as her skin color, and the same with this guy's undershirt and everything. And then we did a little bit of the silver on there, and did red boots, and darkened up again those reds with a little bit of black to make it a little bit of a deeper red, when we did the same thing here with her chest piece there on that gal. And let's see what else. And so we used Nuln Oil there, and we touched her little buttons and things up here with some silver. And again, of course, the leather brown on the back there, like so, and the beastly brown for her bat there. And then here, this fellow, we darkened up the skin tone a little bit more, and we did some straight black on his hat, and then you can see his mustache underneath there, like so. And then again, this sort of dark mix of the blue and the gray, the beastly brown there, a little bit of silver for his arrow on the top there, some silver there. And if you can see underneath here, let's see if I can get a handle of that. We did that dark red underneath there on his little shorts there. And we did black for his boots. And here we did a solid gray on his cloak there. And you can see just a little bit of dry brushing there on his hat, just to kind of pick out little edges and highlights of that. And then in here we did black instead of the silver for the buttons or the belt, the little clasps. I just did black there just to make them a little bit different. And then over here, again, kind of the same idea here with the leather hands, the straight gray there. We did darken that gray a little bit just to kind of break up the sort of the hood of the cloak from the cloak, like that. And then the beastly brown on the little sort of slingshot looking thing, and then the leather brown there. And then we got a little bit of the metallic silver in there. Her boots are also black. And I think that's a little bit lighter on the hair color there. We lightened up that leather brown. And I think that's the only thing there. And of course on the cloaks, you can see you get in, a little bit out of focus there. So you just pick out some highlights and lighten up all those colors. So you take your base color, and once you shade it again, kind of lighten up that base color and go back in that with some highlights. And also on the top of the hood there. Now here's the next warband. This is the Guild. Now this one I got a little bit more creative with the mixed colors. You can see here this is more of a purple color, and that's just a straight mix of the Ultramarine Blue and the Bloody Red just to a color I liked. So it's a little bit lighter purple. You can see I lightened that up again after shading it, and did the tops of the cloaks there. And this was just shaded with a little bit of Nuln Oil to get into some of the little crevices. Her hat is a pure black, as well as her hair. And then again, this blue here is a little bit of a darkened blue with the gray. And then we've got the leather handle there with the Beasty Brown on the little broom pieces. And then her boots are red, and this is the deeper red there. And then a little bit of silver highlights there on the little clasp around her neck, and so on. And then for the highlights here, just a little bit of just a white dry brush on that. And then of course her skin is just the straight flesh tone there. A little bit heavier on the flesh shade there to kind of just darken that up a little bit. And then over here, you can see the difference in the two robes here. This is just a straight blue kind of out of the bottle, and this is a little bit lightened up. And then of course lightened up again on the edges of the robes for the highlights. Here is just a straight flesh shade there with the white actually for the hair and that kind of long ponytail there. And then with the beard there, I do a little bit of Nuln Oil, but again, I wipe it away a lot and just kind of leave that white out to kind of pop and highlight. Now here, this little crystal ball, I actually didn't paint that. I used the Drakenhof Nightshade, the blue shade that comes in that set, and coated his robe and his robe as well with that, but then also just coated that with a very thin layer of that around the ball. So it just keeps a sort of a blue glow to it, but there's no actual paint other than the primer and then that shade. Down here, of course, you got a little bit of leather brown on the sandals there, and the leather brown around that. And that guy's pretty simple like that. And then over here, we did the straight kind of gray. We can see around the owl there. So I did kind of a gray sort of framing of his face, and then the leather brown underneath that for other parts of his face. And I did a little bit of blue bits on their eyes. You can sort of see that there. So instead of just doing like a black dot, I put in a little bit of blue there. Just kind of, I did on all their eyes just to make it sort of fun, keep a theme like that. So we did a Beasty Brown here on his feather hands, and then this is the Bonewhite of the on his hooded cloak there, like that. And then here we've got just a bunch of leather brown all over her front end and the shade there. And then we did the Bonewhite on the back. And then here again, we just kind of left the hair not really painted, then sort of dry brushed some white with some Nuln Oil, lots of it wiped away, just kind of leave her that white hair with a little bit of shading on it. So she's a nice one. I like that one. And this guy's a whole bunch of metal. So we've got that gunmetal in the middle there with the silver metal basically everywhere else, touching these little things there on his feet. And then here we have the Beasty Brown on the most part of that case with a little silver buckle, and then the leather brown going around there. And then we use that hot orange that I showed you earlier, like so, and then shaded this with the Carroburg Crimson to get in the deep parts of it, and then pick out again the highlights on the edges of the robe, like so. So that's that warband. Next we have the Pit Fighters, and this guy's pretty straightforward. I did a little bit of a purple thing for his hair, so it's just a straight mix of the red and the blue, the gunmetal on the shield with the gold around the rim of it, and then that polished gold all the way around. And then we did a little bit of the silver there with a little bit of purple on top, like that. And then black gloves. So he's got his glove there, and then this other glove. You probably won't even see that, but that's underneath. That's there. And then the silver in here again with a black belt. And again, shaded the typical way, Reikland Fleshshade, Nuln Oils, going back over with some highlights here. Dry brushed a little bit of white there on the glove, and so on. That guy's pretty straightforward. And then here we did a little gold on the center of the axe, the straight silver there, some Beasty Brown, and some silver on the handle. She's got the Goblin Green skin, straight blue on the outer part of the shirt, and then the red on the inner part. And then she has this sort of, I didn't actually paint that belt, just left that as the primer color again, and then a little bit of red around the edges like that. And then she just has the Beasty Brown as the hair with some Nuln Oil shading and stuff. You can see there's a little bit of dry brushing on her face. And of course she has gold boots as well. And again, the Drakenhof Nightshade on the blue shirt, that nice blue shade, works pretty well. But the rest of the shading was everything I've said. A little bit of Nuln Oil again, lightly on her little stringy belt there. And then this guy here, this is of course the Goblin Green with a little leather brown on his sort of, I don't know, they're not brass knuckles, but they're sort of like leather knuckles on that side, and black for the belt, and then the little wrist bit, and that's sort of dry brushed. And then there's the Bonewhite on these tips of his little armor pieces and stuff, and then the black thing. And this is just, again, dry brushed on that black sort of waist skirt thing there. So just catching the edges, getting those highlights up like that. Pretty straightforward. Oh, and then also here, he's got the black beard, a little sort of goatee, and then Bonewhite on the teeth there, just picking that out. And then she here has just a straight red there, and then also on the cloak, again, picking out highlights. She's got the leather brown hair with some shading and some highlights. Just the normal flesh tone, some silver on the swords, and then also again on the boots and things. And then let's see what else. Oh, the leather brown there and the red up on there. So she's pretty straightforward. And then the typical stuff with the shading, Carroburg Crimson on the cloak, and Nuln Oil and Fleshshade and all that stuff. And then our kind of wolf character, he has the Beasty Brown. Used some dry brushing to pick out those edges of the fur like that, and did the white dots on the eyes. You can see those came out pretty nice. The black gloves. This is the gray, just a straight gray, darkened up just a tiny bit on his sash, just a straight red on that. Beasty Brown on his legs and things. And that's pretty much it there with this guy. And the same typical Nuln Oil, Agrax Earthshade on the fur and stuff. That's pretty much it for him. He's pretty straight. Oh, then a little bit of a little black dot there for his nose, and then the Bonewhite again on his teeth. And finally, we have the Undead War Band from the expansion. So these guys were a fun thing to do. You can see I did red kind of dots in like all of their eyes there. And then, so on all of the skull bits, that's the Bonewhite there, shaded with Agrax Earthshade. You can see this has the gunmetal and then a little bit of silver picking out the little bumps and kind of that central piece of the shield, silver here. Now his cloak is interesting because I didn't actually paint this guy's cloak or this guy's cloak over here. That's just shaded Agrax Earthshade, shaded right on top of the primer. And then of course leather bits and everything. So all of these actually, since these are kind of zombie undeads, I just shaded everything with Agrax Earthshade. All of the different colors and things. So there's no Carroburg Crimson or Nuln Oil or anything because these are just dirty, gross, disgusting undead. So let's see, that's all of his colors. A little bit of leather brown on some pieces there. Now here we just did the straight blue on his cloak, and then he's got sort of these guts coming out. So I did do a red there and then sort of highlighted it with a sort of a pink, a lightened up color of the red. Gold on the medallion. And then we have there the Bonewhite on his teeth. And then here, this is actually just a straight gray with a bunch of Agrax Earthshade on there. And then, of course, the Goblin Green for his skin. And let's see there, just the black boots and stuff. You can barely see that. Here we have, again, Bonewhite on his, his bones. Some silver there, some Beasty Brown there. This is the Goblin green on his cloak. And then we have the leather brown and stuff on the back there. Again, this is just all Agrax Earthshaded, and going back over with a little bit lighter color to pick out highlights. This gal's pretty fun. She's just straight black hair, little tiny bit of flesh in there with a little red dot, and then the normal flesh shade and just straight red with this leather belt, and then just you can see how the flesh is like looks a lot different with that earth shade on it, and then the silver sword there. And then here we have gunmetal for the helmet, and then silver for the breast pieces, and then gunmetal on the shoulders there. Now his skin is, there's a color in there called dark green, which I didn't use on any of the other miniatures except this guy. So his skin's just a little bit darker. He looks a little bit more zombie-rific, I guess, than these other guys. So I went with the darker green as a base coat there. But yeah, just the blue, and then again, everything's shaded with Agrax Earthshade, leather belt, and so on. And then again, this guy didn't paint any bit of his cloak. Just left it primed and then Agrax Earthshade just to get a little bit of a different tone. Bonewhite on all the skeletal bits. The Beasty Brown there on that. Leather brown on this one. And then again, just shaded, and you can see a little bit of dry brushing on the little edges of this quiver and stuff like that. So that is that, and I hope you got some use out of this. So again, whoops, somebody is going to be winning the copy of the base game and this expansion, and the details will be in the description of the video below. But hope you got some use out of this video and a use out of all of the tabletop showcase videos this week. Definitely check out Wildlands. I've had a lot of fun with that, and I haven't talked about the gameplay very much. Just the painting in this video, of course, but I do actually enjoy the game as well. So definitely seek it out. Hopefully other videos were helpful for you in deciding if you want to take a look at it. But enjoy, and everybody take care. Thanks.